Late-night talk shows are supposed to be classy until they're not. From savage roasts and wildly inappropriate questions to jaw-dropping confessions that made hosts sweat and guests regret everything. This is the uncensored side of television they never warn you about. Legends crossed lines, comedians went nuclear, and some jokes aged like milk. Buckle up, because once these stories start, there's no commercial break fast enough to save anyone. Number 1. Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers didn't cross the line, she treated it like a welcome mat. While most celebrities tiptoed around politeness, Joan charged straight at taboo topics with a blowtorch and a punchline. Oscars, she mocked Angelina Jolie's famous leg like it was a public utility everyone had already seen. Family. She casually joked she wanted her grandson to be gay, not for love or acceptance, but because someone had to care that she once knew Judy Garland. Vegan lifestyles, failed marriages, Hollywood egos, nothing survived her mouth. On talk shows, Joan never waited for permission. She went after Gwyneth Paltrow's wellness empire, roasted Graham Norton's set design, and even turned swimming with sharks into a survival joke that was as cruel as it was unforgettable. The audience gasped. Hosts panicked. Joan smiled. That was both the magic and the menace. Her comedy wasn't meant to make you comfortable, it was meant to expose the absurdity hiding behind fame, beauty, and moral posturing. Joan Rivers believed comedy should sting. If nobody was offended, she hadn't gone far enough. And somehow, between the outrage and the laughter, she forced America to confront truths it preferred to ignore. Love her or hate her, Joan Rivers proved one thing. The most dangerous weapon in Hollywood wasn't youth, fame, or power. It was a fearless woman with a microphone and absolutely nothing to lose. Number 2. John Cleese. John Cleese doesn't joke loudly, he cuts quietly. While other comedians chase applause, Cleese lets the silence do the damage. On talk shows, when asked why he'd been married so many times, he didn't flinch. 4 wives, decades of emotional wreckage, and not a shred of apology. Marriage to Cleese wasn't a fairy tale. It was a long, expensive experiment in human patience. Then came the contrast. Eric Idle proudly mentioned his 40-year marriage, and Cleese fired back with a line so dry, it barely sounded like a joke, staying with one woman. That long doesn't mean a lack of imagination, it requires more of it. The audience laughed, but the truth landed harder than the punchline. Cleese's darkest humor, however, surfaced when he spoke about his mother. She lived through World War I, the Great Depression, Hitler-Stalin, World War II, the atomic bomb, the Cold War, and the space age, and according to Cleese, barely noticed any of it. Not because she was ignorant, but because life in all its chaos had simply become background noise. That's John Cleese's comedy, intellectual, merciless, and deeply British. He doesn't scream about suffering, he shrugs at it. Love, marriage, history, even death are reduced to absurd footnotes in the long joke of existence. You don't laugh because it's outrageous. You laugh because it's uncomfortably accurate. Cleese reminds us that comedy doesn't need shock value to hurt. Sometimes all it takes is a calm voice, a raised eyebrow, and the terrifying realization that none of this ever really made sense in the first place. Number 3. Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor didn't just tell jokes, he survived them. On late-night television, when he went head-to-head with other comedians like Chevy Chase, Pryor was razor-sharp, fearless, and openly arrogant. He mocked talent ego and the idea that comedy was ever supposed to be polite. Every line felt like a challenge laugh or get out of the way. But Pryor's legend wasn't built on roast battles alone. It was forged in fire, literally. After suffering near-fatal burns in a horrific incident that should have ended his career, Pryor returned to television and did the unthinkable. He joked about it. not gently, not carefully. He walked back onto the stage and used his own pain as material, forcing audiences to laugh at something they were still afraid to look at. That was Pryor's superpower. Where others saw trauma, he saw truth. Addiction, racism, fear, nothing was off limits, especially when it came to himself. His comedy wasn't about being edgy for attention. It was about control. If he could laugh at it first, it couldn't him again. Watching Richard Pryor perform felt dangerous, not because he might offend you, but because he might say something so honest it rearranged the room. The laughter came fast, nervous, and uncontrollable. You laughed because the alternative was silence, and silence never stood a chance. Richard Pryor proved that comedy isn't about being safe. It's about standing in the wreckage of your own life, pointing at the flames and saying, "Yeah, that was me," and somehow making the whole country laugh while you did it. Number 4. Craig Ferguson. Craig Ferguson hosted late-night TV like a man who had absolutely nothing to lose, and somehow that made him unstoppable. While other hosts relied on cue cards and safe punchlines, Craig leaned back, dropped the script, and flirted directly with chaos. His interviews weren't conversations. They were tightrope walks over a pit of awkward silence. Innuendo and perfectly timed self-awareness. With guests like Kathy Griffin, Carrie Keegan, Evangeline Lilly, and Pamela Anderson, Craig danced right on the edge of inappropriate. Jokes turned flirtatious. Compliments became dangerous. And just when it felt like he'd gone too far, Craig pulled the ripcord, mocking himself, breaking the fourth wall and reminding everyone that this was all absurd theater. The audience laughed because they weren't sure if they were allowed to. The genius of Craig Ferguson wasn't the flirting, it was consent through comedy. He never pretended to be in control. He let guests push back, tease him, shut him down, or escalate the joke. The power shifted constantly, and that unpredictability was the show. When he crossed a line, he acknowledged it. When things got weird, he leaned in harder. In an era obsessed with polish and branding, Craig Ferguson made late night feel human again, messy, impulsive, and slightly unhinged. His show wasn't about dominance or humiliation. It was about chemistry, timing, and the courage to let the moment breathe. Number 5. Don Rickles. Don Rickles didn't roast people, he attacked them with a smile and dared them to survive. On late-night television, he turned insults into a blood sport, and no one was safer for knowing him. Jay Leno's famously oversized chin, Rickles treated it like a public landmark. He mocked it, measured it, threatened medical procedures on it all, while grinning like a man doing charity work. What made Rickles dangerous wasn't the cruelty, it was the confidence. He insulted celebrities to their faces, stripped them of status, and somehow made them thank him for it. The audience roared because Rickles wasn't punching down, he was punching everyone equally. Fame meant nothing. Ego meant less. When paired with high-energy chaos like Roberto Benigni, Rickles didn't retreat. He doubled down, barking insults through laughter, turning the stage into a verbal boxing ring where the only rule was speed. Miss a beat, and you were dead. Rickles' genius was control. The insults were brutal, but the warmth underneath was undeniable. You knew he liked you, otherwise you wouldn't be worth the effort. Being roasted by Don Rickles was a badge of honor. If he ignored you, that's when you should have worried. In today's world, Don Rickles would be labeled problematic in under 10 seconds. Back then, he was revered, not because he was nice, but because he was honest. He exposed how fragile celebrity egos really were, one merciless punchline at a time. Number 6, David Letterman. David Letterman mastered late-night television by pretending he was just asking questions. But beneath the gap-toothed grin and Midwestern shrug was a man who knew exactly how far he could push before things got uncomfortable and then pushed a little more. With guests like Sandra Bullock, Charlize Theron, Martha Stewart, and Raquel Welch, Letterman had a habit of steering interviews straight into personal territory and refusing to blink. He asked about nude scenes like they were weather updates. He probed prison time with Martha Stewart as if curiosity were a public service. When conversations drifted toward bodies or humiliation, Letterman leaned forward smiling, letting the silence do the dirty work. Guests laughed because stopping would have felt worse. The audience laughed because they sensed danger. That was Letterman's real talent-controlled awkwardness. He wasn't loud. He wasn't crude. He simply let discomfort hang in the air until someone filled it, usually the guest. If things got tense, he'd retreat into irony, pretending it was all harmless fun. "I don't know," he'd say, as if the moment had happened by accident. In hindsight, many of those interviews feel like cultural time capsules. What once passed as edgy charm now reads like power wrapped in politeness. Letterman didn't need to insult you. He let you expose yourself. Number 7, Eddie Murphy. Before Eddie Murphy became a global superstar, there was Uncle Ray, and Uncle Ray made sure nobody ever forgot it. When Eddie brought him onto a talk show, Ray didn't bask in reflected fame. He weaponized it. With perfect timing and zero shame, Ray announced he'd gone from making decent money to earning almost nothing, all because he was now officially Eddie Murphy's uncle. The joke landed hard because it was painfully real. Ray complained that he'd lost his name, his independence, and sometimes even his dignity. "I used to be Ray Murphy," he said. "Now I'm just Eddie Murphy's uncle." Eddie laughed harder than anyone because the truth stung and because Ray was funnier than half the room without even trying. That was the brilliance of the moment. Fame didn't lift everyone equally. For every megastar, there was a relative standing slightly behind the limousine, sometimes literally running after it. Ray's delivery was effortless, unpolished, and devastatingly honest. No punchlines written, no act rehearsed. Just life slightly exaggerated. What made it unforgettable was Eddie's reaction. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He let Ray talk because comedy like that can't be managed. It has to be survived. Number 8, Jim Henson, Kermit the Frog. When Jim Henson appeared on late-night TV as Kermit the Frog, it was supposed to be wholesome, family-friendly, safe, and for about 30 seconds it was. Then the host asked Kermit the one question no puppet was ever prepared for. "How's your love life?" The silence hit like a brick. Kermit froze, then snapped back with perfect deadpan logic. "You don't ask a frog about... You wouldn't ask Captain Kangaroo about his bedroom habits, would you?" The joke sounded innocent, but the subtext was radioactive. The audience laughed because it felt wrong, and because Kermit knew it felt wrong. What followed was a masterclass in double entendre disguised as children's television. A sore throat became a person in my throat. A frog joke landed exactly where it wasn't supposed to. Jim Henson played the moment, like jazz reacting, deflecting, and twisting. Discomfort into absurdity without ever breaking character. That was the genius. Henson proved you didn't need profanity to push boundaries. You just needed timing, intelligence, and a felt puppet brave enough to say what humans couldn't. It was comedy that slipped past the censors, smiling, then winked at the adults in the room. Number 9. Fran Drescher. Fran Drescher walked onto talk shows with a voice you couldn't ignore and confidence that dared you to keep up. When asked whether she judged men by their money, Fran smiled sweetly and set the trap. No, she said, she never cared about a man's wallet. There were far more important measurements. Then came the pause, the look, the punchline. The audience lost it. Fran's comedy was never about subtlety, it was about control. She leaned into her sexuality, flipped expectations, and made hosts visibly regret asking safe-sounding questions. What seemed like polite curiosity turned into a public ambush, and Fran never apologized for it. Behind the joke was something sharper. Fran Drescher refused to play the grateful guest. She owned the room, owned the narrative, and used humor to dismantle the idea that women should be modest, quiet, or impressed by money. Her jokes weren't just dirty, they were strategic. In a male-dominated late-night world, Fran didn't ask for space. She took it, laughed loudly inside it, and dared anyone to try shutting her up. The humor hit hard because it came wrapped in charm, and by the time you realized what she'd done, the laugh had already escaped. Number 10. Nikki Glaser. Nikki Glaser walked onto the roast stage knowing one thing for sure: sympathy was not on the menu. When Tom Brady became the target, Nikki didn't circle politely. She went straight for the open wound: his divorce, his pride. And most brutally, the moment he encouraged his wife to try jiu-jitsu, only to lose her to the instructor. The joke hit like a slow-motion car crash. Nikki calmly explained that the dumbest decision Brady ever made wasn't coming to the roast. It was suggesting martial arts to someone who would later date a man capable of physically destroying him. The audience gasped, then erupted. Brady smiled the way only someone contractually obligated to smile can. What made the moment lethal wasn't cruelty, it was precision. Nikki never raised her voice. She didn't insult Tom's talent or legacy, she attacked the illusion of control. The idea that success protects you from humiliation. It doesn't. Nikki Glaser's comedy lives in that uncomfortable truth: everyone bleeds, even legends. Especially legends. Her jokes feel personal because they are. She exposes the soft underbelly of fame and invites the audience to laugh at what power can't prevent. Number 11. Michael Rapaport and Kenya Moore. Michael Rapaport never enters a conversation quietly. When he confronted Kenya Moore on live television, he came armed with opinions, confidence, and absolutely no exit plan. He told her flat out what fans whispered online: that she was the villain. Not misunderstood. Not misedited. A villain. Kenya didn't blink. She shut him down with surgical calm, reminding him that his judgment meant nothing to hers. What followed wasn't comedy, it was combat disguised as banter. Michael doubled down. Kenya stood her ground. The audience leaned forward. The tension worked because neither backed off. Michael played the loudmouth fan who thought honesty gave him permission. Kenya played the professional who refused to accept disrespect wrapped as commentary. Each line drew blood in a different way. It was messy, awkward, completely unscripted, and unforgettable. That exchange revealed the dark side of talk shows when entertainment forgets consent. Michael thought he was being funny. Kenya knew she was being tested. And in that clash, the real show emerged, not about humor, but power perception and who gets to define the narrative. Number 12. Rosie Perez. Rosie Perez didn't come on to late-night television to look polished. She came to survive it. When she casually began describing a wardrobe malfunction from her early career, the story spiraled: fast hands flying, body-twisting words tumbling out faster than the host could stop her. Before anyone realized what was happening, Rosie had just reenacted the exact moment her dress slipped all the way down to her ankles in front of a live audience. The studio exploded. Rosie laughed first, hardest, and loudest, because embarrassment only works if you let it. She didn't freeze. She didn't apologize. She owned it. What could have been humiliation instantly turned into dominance. Rosie's comedy has always lived in that space, raw, physical, unfiltered. She talked about growing up rough fighting when she had to surviving environments that didn't care if you were polite. Her stories weren't jokes written for comfort. They were memories sharpened into weapons. That's why the moment worked. Rosie wasn't sharing an accident. She was reclaiming it. In an industry obsessed with perfection, she reminded everyone that control doesn't come from looking flawless. It comes from refusing to be ashamed. Rosie Perez proved that sometimes the funniest thing you can do on television is beat everyone to the punchline, especially when the joke was almost on you. Number 13. Bo Derek. Johnny Carson had interviewed thousands of people, but the night Bo Derek sat beside him, the system glitched. He lost his rhythm. His questions drifted. He openly admitted he felt uncomfortable, a confession almost unheard of from the king of late night. Bo didn't do anything outrageous. She didn't tell dirty jokes. She didn't push boundaries. She simply existed, calm, poised, impossibly composed. And that was enough to dismantle a veteran host in real time. Johnny asked if she was private, if she stayed home, if she was comfortable, questions that revealed far more about him than her. The audience watched as America's smoothest interviewer struggled to regain control of his own show. The humor came from reversal. The man who usually commanded the room suddenly became the nervous one. Bo Derek never capitalized on it. She let the moment breathe. Silence did the rest. That interview became legendary not because of scandal, but because of vulnerability. Johnny Carson proved that even the most powerful figure on television could be undone not by controversy, but by presence. Sometimes the most dramatic late-night moments happen when nobody tries to be funny, and the truth slips out anyway. Number 14. Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters didn't come on talk shows to charm anyone she came to fight. And when actor Oliver Reed casually dropped the idea that women were happiest in the kitchen, Shelley didn't laugh, deflect, or soften the blow. She went straight for the throat. What followed was not banter. It was a public collision. Reed doubled down, masking sexism with confidence and old-world bravado. Shelley fired back with disbelief so sharp it sliced through the room. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they were watching comedy or a live courtroom cross-examination. Shelley's power came from refusal. She refused to smile it off, refused to play the agreeable guest, refused to let misogyny hide behind irony. Her responses were blunt, sarcastic, and fearless, the kind of humor that doesn't ask for laughs, but earns them by exposure. The moment worked because Shelley didn't try to win. She tried to reveal. And in doing so, she made Reed's comments look smaller, older, and increasingly absurd. Late-night TV rarely allows real confrontation. That night, it couldn't escape it. Shelley Winters proved that sometimes the most powerful punchline isn't funny at all. It's watching someone realize their worldview no longer has an audience. Number 15. Gino D'Acampo. Gino D'Acampo didn't lose his temper on television. He detonated it. When a host compared his Italian carbonara to a British version with ham. Gino paused, smiled, and delivered one of the most accidental insults in TV history. If my grandmother had wheels, she would have been a bike. The studio froze, then exploded. Gino wasn't being rude. He was being Italian. To him, food wasn't casual conversation. It was identity, history, bloodline. The comparison wasn't just wrong. It was offensive in a way only food people understand. What made the moment legendary was Gino's sincerity. He wasn't joking. He was genuinely confused by the logic. His metaphor landed because it exposed how ridiculous the argument was, not because it tried to be clever. The host scrambled. The audience laughed harder. A meme was born. In one sentence, Gino turned a cooking segment into cultural commentary. He reminded viewers that some traditions aren't flexible, and that sometimes the funniest line on television is the one that slips out when patience runs out. Gino D'Acampo proved that passion doesn't need a punchline. If it's honest enough, comedy will chase it anyway. Number 16. Chris Farley. Chris Farley never entered a room quietly. He crashed into it like a human wrecking ball, powered by pure enthusiasm. So when actress Judith Light appeared on a talk show and casually mentioned a breakaway outfit that required partial, Farley short-circuited in real time. He jumped out of his chair. He shouted. He begged. He physically could not process the concept of restraint. The host tried to keep things moving. Farley tried to stay seated. Neither succeeded. What made the moment legendary wasn't just Farley's excitement, it was his honesty. There was no cool, no irony, no attempt at sophistication. He reacted the way a 12-year-old trapped in a grown man's body would react, and the audience loved him for it. His lack of shame was the joke. The segment collapsed into chaos. Producers scrambled. A commercial break arrived like an emergency exit. And Farley. He looked genuinely proud, not because of what he saw, but because he felt everything out loud. Chris Farley reminded late-night television of something it often forgets: comedy doesn't need cleverness to work. Sometimes all it needs is pure, uncontrollable human impulse and the courage to not hide it. Number 17. Sofia Vergara. Before Sofia Vergara became a sitcom icon, her life almost went in a very different direction: dentistry. On a talk show, she casually revealed that if she hadn't been discovered on a beach, she'd be drilling teeth in Colombia instead of stealing scenes in Hollywood. The audience laughed. The host laughed harder. And then Sofia twisted the knife. As she explained being told to dye her hair darker to look more Latina, she fired off a line that instantly detonated. Her male co-star didn't have that problem. He looked more Mexican than a taco. The studio exploded. Sofia's humor worked because it was fearless and self-aware. She mocked stereotypes while exploiting them, flipping expectations before anyone else could. Her accent wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. Every joke landed with confidence, sharp enough to cut through condescension. Behind the laughter was something sharper. Sofia understood the game. She knew how Hollywood categorized people, and she beat it by laughing first and loudest. Sofia Vergara proved that the fastest way to survive being underestimated is to make it entertaining. If they're laughing, they're listening. And by the time they realize what you've done, you're already in control of the room. Number 18. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't beat his rivals with muscles. Alone, sometimes he used psychology. In the 1980s, Hollywood action stars were locked in a quiet war, and Sylvester Stallone was Arnold's biggest competition. So when Arnold heard about a truly terrible comedy script making the rounds, he knew exactly what to do. He pretended to be interested. Word reached Stallone that Arnold might take the role. That was all it took. Fueled by rivalry and ego, Stallone jumped in immediately, determined not to lose another project to Schwarzenegger. Arnold stepped back. The trap closed. The movie bombed spectacularly. Arnold told the story years later with casual honesty, like someone describing a chess move rather than career sabotage. He didn't apologize. He laughed. In Hollywood, this wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. The humor came from how nakedly human it was. Even the biggest stars aren't above pettiness. They compete. They manipulate. and sometimes they smile while doing it. Arnold Schwarzenegger proved that in show business, strength isn't always physical. Sometimes it's knowing when to say nothing, let someone else make the wrong move, and quietly walk away the winner. Number 19. Eddie Griffin. Eddie Griffin grew up in a household where profanity wasn't forbidden, it was tradition. So when asked on a talk show whether his mother ever got mad at him for cursing, Eddie didn't hesitate. No, his mother cursed more than he did. That's where he learned it. The audience laughed, but Eddie went deeper. As a kid, he thought his name was Mother. Mother, take out the trash. Mother, wash the dishes. Mother, cut the yard. The day she finally called him Eddie, he was confused. Who the hell is that? The joke worked because it wasn't exaggerated. It was survival humor shaped by a loud, tough, unapologetic woman who raised him with discipline and language sharp enough to peel paint. Eddie didn't resent it. He revered it. That moment revealed Eddie Griffin's comedic DNA. Raw, loud, unfiltered, but rooted in love. His comedy doesn't clean things up for comfort. It drags real life onto the stage and lets it talk exactly the way it always has. Eddie Griffin reminded audiences that comedy doesn't come from politeness. It comes from truth, especially when that truth is yelling at you from the kitchen.